So doing one thing or two things very well and being able to communicate that clearly will enable people to understand what you do and get interested. Our customers were, when they were refinancing student loans, were saving an average of $20,000. Some days you think you're going to change the world, the next day you think it's going to collapse almost at the deepest troughs. Yeah, these people are smart, but they're not, rocket scientist type people. There's not that much difference between me and them. So if they can do it, why can't I?
Welcome to the Lost Entrepreneur Podcast. And for all the first-time listeners, I'm Sebastian Romero. And today we have with us Dan Macklin, the co-founder of SoFi and former US CEO of Salary Finance. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure, Sebastian.
So getting into the first question, what do you think is the most valuable lesson you were taught growing up?
Probably to treat other people as you want to be treated yourself, which can sound very basic, something your mother might have taught you when you were young. But I think that stands you in good stead for life and in business. I think too often there's stereotypes thrown around about business leaders being macho men who shout at everybody and bark orders out. And while that approach can work in some circumstances, I think ultimately you can burn people out very quickly. And treating people as you want to be treated with respect and empathy, I think can get you a long way.
I have a friend that he's just he's trying to create an app. And he kind of is in the medium of being like a little bit too nice, where it's like he's not sure if he's getting across his, the urgency of what he needs to do.
To his employees?
Employee.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you become the nicest person on the planet and don't ever have a kind of cross word with anyone, but I think it's doing it in a way that doesn't embarrass them, in a way that isn't calling them out directly in front of other people in an inappropriate way. But you have to be very direct, and particularly in a startup environment, you don't have much time, or rather you have very limited resources. So if you're concentrating on this thing over here, it means you're not doing this thing over here. So you have to be straight with people, but that you can do that, in a good way.
Got it. So when did you realize that you could pursue the idea of SoFi?
So my story is a bit different to most. I grew up in the UK, went to university there, and then joined a bank called Standard Chartered Bank, and had a 12-year career there in London, in Singapore, back to London, and then most recently in China. And the bank was very good to me, and I was doing well, and I could easily have stayed there. But there was this little bit of me that was thinking, well, maybe I'd like to start my business one day, or start a business one day. And I didn't really have the tools or the know-how to do that. And I was fortunate enough to get into the business school at Stanford, which is a very good school on the west coast of the US, and really there learned a lot of stuff through the classes, but also just saw people and heard from people who had been in a similar position and who had started things. And I think that proximity to people who had done stuff before, and many of them had made a success of it, gives you, or gave me, a belief, well, if they can do it, why can't I? I think sometimes when you're not exposed to this kind of world, you read about it in the media, or you see YouTube videos or whatever it is, and it can feel very distant. But as soon as you're in and around it in much more of a meaningful way, you can see that, yeah, these people are smart, but they're not, rocket scientist type people. There's not that much difference between me and them. So if they can do it, why can't I? And I think that gave me the motivation. And I was surrounded by other people with similar thoughts, and a few of us in the class, myself and 3 classmates, came up with the idea for what became SoFi during business school. And I became confident enough that it had potential that I resigned from my bank because I was supposed to go back there. I was sponsored by them. And I always joke that was the most expensive email I ever sent, because in resigning, suddenly I had to pay back Stanford's tuition where previously the bank was paying for it. So that was a big, but it showed me, making that decision, it showed me that it made me make the right decision, or at least think about what that decision was. And then I was committed. And then we were off. And what is this now? 12 years ago now.
Do you think that you could have, applied yourself the way you did if you didn't send in that resignation letter? Like if you were kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out?
I think what it did was gave me a deadline to make a decision. I think sometimes, and I've heard this, people have ideas for companies and they work on them in the evenings and at weekends while pursuing a full-time job. And sometimes that's how you have to do it because you have a family and you have commitments and rent and mortgages or whatever it is. The trouble with that is there isn't necessarily a trigger point or a deadline that forces you to say, I'm either doing this or I'm not. I was lucky in that respect in that the academic year ended in June, and my bank, my old bank, was kind of contacting me in around March saying, okay, let's talk about what the job is you want to come back to. So there was a very definitional kind of point in time where I had to make a decision one way or the other. That forced me to have hard conversations with myself and with my wife to work out, is this something I want to do? So, and I think that was a blessing in disguise, because I think the problem is if you don't have that, you can drift forever and ever and never really pull that trigger.
Yeah. How was the reaction from your like close friends and family to being like, well, you have this great stable job and then suddenly I'm throwing it all away and I'm going to restart?
Everyone was supportive, but I think, and I give credit to my wife, she was extremely supportive. The easy thing, the default thing, was to go back to probably Asia somewhere where we'd lived as a family, and we had the trappings of an expat life, good healthcare, private schooling for the kids and all this kind of stuff. So it was a good life. But I think people could see that I believed in the mission of what SoFi was at the time, and they could see that I was passionate about it. So no one really tried to talk me out of it. And I think in a way, Stanford's a great place for that, because you're surrounded by people who are doing things like that, and it's almost expected that you'll be thinking in that way. So I didn't have too much opposition.
When did you realize all four of you were onto something?
I think when we were coming up with the idea for the company, we kind of at the beginning this was back in 2010, 2011. We'd just gone through the Great Recession. Banks were public enemy number one. No one liked their bank. So we saw that there was a space to build a more social kind of finance company, and that's where the name came from, social finance, shortened to SoFi. I think we lucked into a bit the product. We didn't know that the student loan industry was as screwed up as it was and continues to be. But that's what research is, and that's what doing your digging on the potential market unearths. And we realized that you couldn't borrow really or refinance student loans at anywhere except the government, and these were very standard rates. And for what at the time, when the interest rate environment was extremely low or zero almost, they were very high rates. So I think we realized pretty early that this could be big. And then, of course, lots of people think their company is going to be big. I think truly once we started the company and our first customers came through the door, so to speak, through the website, and actually you're moving real money into their accounts, I think that's kind of when it struck us that, this is real now.
When was that turning point when it went from an idea that you were like, this has a lot of potential, to this has momentum, this is going to change the world? Yeah,
there's a couple of points along the way. I probably should have done a better job at writing them down at the time, because I do remember there were certain days where I did feel, okay, that's a step change. We've now moved into the next kind of chapter. Mm-hmm. But looking back, it all merges into one. It's a little bit difficult to remember. But there were instances. I think when you get that first customer, that first couple of days of opening the website, real people are coming in, and because anyone in practice or in theory can say, yes, I would use your service. What's difficult is, do they kind of put their
money where their mouth is?
Yeah, money where their mouth is. And in this case, it was borrowing money and actually use you. And then I think as you hit certain milestones in terms of the amount of money lent, the number of customers you've got, the investor appetite, the investor dollars raised, employees, suddenly you look around the room and think, well, this is getting quite big now. So there were moments along the way where you suddenly think, this is we're onto something here.
I guess doing a little 360, what were the challenges, and was there any point where you said to yourself, is this going to work out?
Yes, many challenges. And I think kind of what you see, or what founders will tell you about the progress of their company is a relatively straight line kind of going up. And in hindsight, it's not like that. It kind of jumps around. You have good days, you have bad days. I think some days you think your company's going to change the world. I think you use those words. And then the next day, you may think this is not going to work for different reasons. And the truth is somewhere in the middle usually, and it's, try and have more of the former days than the latter days. But it really is difficult to keep that smooth trajectory. You always hit obstacles, and we definitely did. The way that we structured the company at the beginning in terms of where we raised the money to be able to lend was not the right way. We had to pivot, to use the Stanford kind of vernacular. We had to change to raise money from a different source so that we could make that more efficient. And that probably took us a year or so to work that out. And during those times, then you wondered, can we really find the money to make this a success? And it took a while to overcome that.
I guess whenever you hear of a success story, you kind of think it either took, let's say, the Jeff Bezos route of like 20 years of having Amazon and nothing was going through the door. And when was that for you? How was that timeline looking like for SoFi?
It was quite quick. We raised money within a couple of months of starting. We raised $4 million, and then we raised money. Subsequent rounds of financing relatively frequently, roughly once a year after that. So although raising venture money is not be all and end all, because you're giving away part of your company, and in many respects, if you can avoid that, that's better. It is a consistent touch point to show that you're going the right way. If there are new people willing to give you new money, it's an indication that you're going in the right direction. So we grew pretty quickly, and I forget the exact dates, but we became a unicorn company, I think about 4 years after our existence. So compared to many companies, it was extremely quick. So that doesn't mean that there weren't kind of down times, and to your previous question, times where you thought this wouldn't succeed, but they weren't too long. It wasn't like we went for 2 years struggling to work out what was next. It was relatively quick.
So I guess one of my other questions from that is, if you went so quickly from this is SoFi in 4 years and then unicorn company, how long was this planning stage from when you were like, this is the idea, this is how we're going to execute, and then executing?
So again, we had the benefit of the academic calendar and the Stanford business school education. We came up with the idea in about January of 2011, and we were graduating in June of that year. So we all kind of made a commitment that if we're going to do this, we need to do it as soon as we graduate or soon after we graduate. So we had that 6-month period really to flesh out the idea, to speak to as many people as we could, to seek their opinion. But again, I think that was a blessing in that if it wasn't going to be, if that wasn't going to happen, then we would have taken other jobs elsewhere or done other things. So it was kind of a forcing function that required us to make a decision. And I think I resigned from my bank by about April, and by that time, all 4 of us were kind of fully in. So for the last 3 months of life at Stanford, we knew that this was about to happen, and it was really doing as much as we can while we were there and using the resources of what is a great school to prepare us as best we can for the company formally starting.
How did you deviate from your original plan, or did you have to be very fluid with what was happening, or did you try to stick to as much of your original plan as you did?
Yes and no. So I've still got the pitch deck that we went round to the VCs with in that summer, and I looked at it a few months ago, and what we said we wanted to build was the thing that ended up getting built. It very much was using student loans as a way to get into a segment of the population that really was relatively underbanked, wasn't being very well treated by the banks, but then building from that one product to go to other products and becoming basically a bank for that population of upwardly mobile, young people. So broadly speaking, I would say that was the vision, and that was what we actually made happen. And to this day, I left a few years ago, but now SoFi is a public company, and it has basically all the products that a bank would have across a variety of types. So yeah, I think we stayed true to that vision. Now, does that mean that you don't deviate along the way? Of course not. Tactically there were ways that we thought we would get there that weren't the right way, but the company now, as it exists today, looks a lot like what we wanted, or what we put on paper and said that we could build 10, 11 years ago.
What was your motivation to leave banking? Because I get that you had this massive idea, you thought it could work, but what switched you from being, was it Stanford? Was it that community, or was it something else that made you switch from, I'm already set, I don't need to do this, to, I guess, what put you over the edge?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And I think I was in my early 30s. I'd been working for 11, 12 years. And I kind of thought, well, if I don't do it now, I've physically moved to the center of the startup universe. Like, people plot their whole lives how to get to Silicon Valley and San Francisco to be part of this startup community. And I'm here now, and I have classmates who have ideas, and I'm contributing to those ideas, and we have the opportunity to actually build something. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. If I go back to my old employer or elsewhere, then maybe I'll do it, but probably I won't, because at that point then I've got to really make a big change. Whereas now I'm already here, my family's already here, we're just going to move a few miles up the road. So I think I was lucky in that respect, again, that I was kind of forced into that decision at that time. And that's one of the benefits of doing further education, where you kind of get to take a little bit of time out of your regular working life and then think, well, what do I want to do? I think sometimes when you're in a job, it's too easy just to keep going with that job or take the relatively obvious promotion that can come from that. So yeah, beneficial of circumstance, but looking back, proud of myself and my family and my wife that we made that decision, because most startups don't succeed, or certainly don't succeed in a massive way that can really make it worth it. So if you look just at the odds and kind of look at it very rationally, you probably would never do it. So you've got to have some kind of inner belief beyond that logic.
Did you always have that dream to have your own startup, or was it like, again, at Stanford?
I think I did, but I didn't really know how to go about it. So when I joined the bank, Standard Chartered, straight from university on their graduate recruitment drive, and we're in kind of the late 90s here, and that was just not the formulaic way, but like it wasn't like now, I don't think, as much, where people are aware of the startup world and venture capital. I mean, I'm joking a bit, because if you were in Silicon Valley, you would have known this stuff existed, but I didn't really know it in London. And so I took the route that was kind of easy for me, or the most obvious for me. But yeah, I always harbored something. I just didn't quite know how to go about it, and I think Stanford unlocked that.
So your idea of SoFi, what gravitated you towards helping people financially, especially during, like you said, right after the 2008 crisis?
Yeah, I think finance is a huge thing that many people don't really think that much about. In a way, there's more interesting things, like people spend their spare time watching sports, playing music, going for drinks with friends. But the reality is, the way that you manage your financial life is very important. Now, one way to manage it better is to earn more money, but that's not easy to do. And ultimately, most people have a finite amount of money, a certain amount of money. And the decisions they make about what they do with that money and where they invest it, where they save it, and probably more importantly, if they need to borrow, where they borrow from and how much they pay, they have a massive impact on people's lives. The most extreme being, once you're in debt, it's very hard to get out of debt. So I saw that we really had an ability to make a meaningful impact on people's lives. Our customers were, when they were refinancing student loans, were saving an average of $20,000. So this is big money. And I used to meet customers face to face, and we called them members, and they would tell me that in many cases that they now had better kind of mental health, less stress, because they felt like their money was in order. That then allowed them to propose to a partner, or think about having a family, or buying a home, things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So the knock-on impact of improving one aspect of your financial life is massive. So that mission was important to the founders and to the early employees, and really to all of the employees, I think, certainly in those early years. And that helps you to work hard and to kind of get over bad days, because ultimately, you're doing something good.
So it was all the response you got. It was just incredible to see that, and that kind of drove you, I guess, through all those hard times that you had.
Yeah, we were lucky because again, with the big banks are very kind of they're not personal whatsoever. Like, I don't feel like my bank really knows who I am. It's only when you get very rich that they actually really want to know you. For the average person on the street, you're just like another number to them. And we tried to take a different approach. So we were much more personal with our members. We held events for them where they could meet each other. Things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, or you wouldn't expect a bank to do, or even if they did invite you to some event, you wouldn't go to it. And I think that cultivated a culture and a brand, a SoFi brand that was easy for people to then tell their friends about. And that's what we wanted. We wanted something that people would get a lot out of it, and not just a loan and then kind of file it away, but be more ever present in their life in other interesting ways. And I think largely we achieved that.
You didn't want to just be another bank. You want to actually connect with your...
Yeah, which can sound cheesy and can sound, every employer or big company's website has some tagline that alludes to something like that. But can you actually do it? And I think it's much harder to do. As an example, we set up a Facebook group. This back in the days when Facebook was a bit bigger than it is now, and I think we had the second largest Facebook group behind Peloton, which was in its early days, of basically just people being in a group together and exchanging ideas. We had about 50,000 people, customers, members in a group, and people would ask for advice, and they trusted that community of other members enough that they would put their questions into that forum, and you'd get really good discussion. And again, that's the kind of thing that it's very hard for a big bank to cultivate that kind of feeling among its user base.
When SoFi got bigger, how did you keep that connection with your people? Because it seems maybe just like big banks, it's just more people means less time for each person.
And I think that's a challenge. And my guess is SoFi, I'm not directly involved anymore, but that would be one of the challenges, because now it's a really big company, and keeping that level of intimacy with customers in an appropriate way is difficult. But we did stuff, as we got bigger, we went around the country and hosted events in different cities around the place. We had a phenomenal customer service team that were real people. We didn't kind of try to automate everything to the point that you never spoke to anybody. And I think in some businesses, automation is good. In some businesses, Uber may be an example, I don't want to speak to 3 people to book a car, and you're too young and you won't remember, but before Uber came along, that's how it was. You'd phone up a taxi company, someone would answer the phone, they'd say, can you give me a second, I'm speaking to somebody else. It just was a very long, drawn out process. I want efficiency when I'm booking a car.
But when I'm borrowing huge amounts of money or saving huge amounts of money,
You don't want to talk to a robot.
I do want to talk to someone, because I probably have a question that is different to other people, or even if it's not, I just want a human voice. And I think sometimes some industries forget that in the kind of search for automation and efficiency, and sometimes a bit of human connection is a good thing.
Do you think that if you guys were to, do you think that the attraction to automation for, let's say, these big banks is because of maybe profit margins, or because it's a little bit easier to cut that than some other things that they have?
Yeah, and look, ultimately companies need to make money, and you can't it's difficult to have hundreds of people taking the phone calls and speaking for an hour to every customer. Although Zappos, the shoe company, does have an approach like that, which is an interesting one that you should read about. But generally there is of course there's room for efficiency, and many people want efficiency. So for many things around the transaction, certainly once you have a loan, like how do I see my statement? How do I make a repayment? I don't need to speak to someone for that. But I think for some big decisions along the way, particularly when I'm making a decision about who I put my trust in, that's where having that availability and making it easy to speak to someone, it's not kind of buried 17 pages in and I have to find it. I think that's crucially important. We had a button at the top of the webpage for the first few years that kind of said ask the CEO, and you clicked it and it was an email that just went straight through to the CEO, my fellow co-founder. And it's great because you hear what people want and think, and I think too often you kind of think you know what people want, but oftentimes you don't, and that continually surprised us in the things that people would say. They'd come up with ideas as to how the process could be better, or they would question why is it done like this, and then we might say, well, why is it done like this? You can get into inertia very quickly. So I think just having that capability or providing that capability is a good thing.
So speaking of your co-founder being the CEO of SoFi, how was it then your transition to salary finance as the CEO?
So I took some time off in between. I left SoFi in 2017 after 6.5 years, and then I did some work advising companies and going on a couple of boards and kind of working out what I wanted to do next. And then I joined Salary Finance, which was a UK headquartered company, which is my homeland, but they were expanding to the US, and they just opened an office in Boston where we are today, and they wanted someone to run that. And it ticked or checked a lot of the boxes for me, in that there were lots of similarities with the work I'd done at SoFi, but it was slightly different, or different enough to be interesting. And I really liked the founding team. I really liked the mission. It was all about helping people who with their financial lives who need it. And actually, with salary finance, a lot of it is helping people who really have nowhere else to go, and who are paying otherwise would be paying ridiculously high interest rates. So it was a great cause. I think I had a great job in that I was CEO of the US team, but ultimately the board and the global CEO sat in London. So I was kind of free to make my own decisions with nearly everything, but ultimately someone else was looking over me in terms of raising money and the broader strategy of the company. But I had enough flexibility and enough freedom to enjoy that role hugely.
Did you do any? Did you have enough experience from SoFi to go into that role easily, or were you asking around for advice, and did you go into further education for that role?
I didn't go into further education, but it definitely was a different role. It was much more like the buck stops with me. And look, at SoFi I ran teams, big teams. So you had Standard Chartered Bank, I was running big teams. So I kind of got up in front of 100 people and said, this is what we're going to do. And in all the difficulties of doing that in terms of coming up with a strategy, getting people to believe in it, working out who's doing what, hiring the right people, like all of that I'd done. This was just a little bit more acute. in terms of customers, there was no one really to refer up to. So I think I'd had good training, but yeah, he'd still got tested in a major way. I think one of the challenges with any business is how much to communicate to the employees. Like we mentioned earlier, some days you think you're going to change the world, the next day you think it's going to collapse almost at the deepest troughs. You can't convey all of that to your employees. Now, that doesn't mean you are dishonest or you're lying, but you can't, it's just not efficient to say everything about your highs and lows. So kind of maintaining that constant enthusiasm, appropriate levels of enthusiasm to get people excited, but not too excited, I think is, whatever the business is a challenge.
So was your job as CEO more about like kind of, well, obviously not your main purpose, but it was to kind of keep the spirits of the company alive and not, I guess, be kind of I want to say semi-permeable membrane, but
yeah, no, I get it. I mean, look, that's one of the things. Probably bigger than that, or as big as that, is making sure that you're pursuing the right strategy. So, as the CEO, you can basically direct all of the team to go and work on this thing over here. Now, there's an alternative over here, there's an alternative over here. So picking that right piece of work or area of work is probably the most important thing. Then I would say hiring the right people, particularly if you're there at the beginning. You're going to have to hire the majority of the people that are going to make this happen. But then once they're in place, keeping people motivated, making sure they are professionally and personally fulfilled in coming to work every day is really a tough thing. And so some of that comes to your question, kind of motivating the troops and making sure that people understand the mission, making sure new employees who are coming in understand what this company is about. That's a big part of the job. And as the CEO, particularly for those first kind of 50 employees, it's very important. Once the company gets bigger than that, I think you can't necessarily have an intimate, close relationship with every employee just because there's not enough hours in the day. So you rely on your team to make sure that they do that. But they take direction from you. So yeah, it's very important.
How do you navigate when, let's say, you make maybe an incorrect or less efficient decision and then you pivot? What do you tell your team when that occurs?
I think you have to be honest, and people appreciate honesty. If you've made a mistake and you've gone after a particular customer or tried to develop a particular product and it's proven that's not the thing, then trying to make that decision quickly to kind of reverse course, and then being honest to say, yeah, it didn't work out, let's go another way. You don't have to kind of cover it up and pretend that every decision you ever made was perfect, and because obviously it isn't.
How did you decide to step back from SoFi?
Good question. I think it's different for everyone. I've spoken to a lot of founders who've started things and that have gone on to be decently successful, and then I think everyone to some extent struggles with when do you leave, how do you leave. I think and it's different for everybody. For me, we'd been going 6.5 years. As I mentioned earlier, the company had grown a lot. We were worth about $4 billion. We'd lent $20 billion. We had over 1,000 employees, and it felt like we had enough very, very capable senior managers in the firm that the company wasn't going to collapse if I left by any means. So that obviously enables the decision. I think for me, I was missing the early days when you could kind of have an idea and run with it. And by the time I was leaving, there was a lot more structure, rightly so. But in a company with 1,000 people, you kind of need different committees and different groups, and you can't just run off and do something. You kind of need to check that's in line with other people's work. So I missed those early, slightly more freewheeling days, and I just wanted to take a break and think about what I wanted to do next. So it felt like the right time. And there isn't a day that goes by where I regret that decision. I think I got the timing about as good as I could do for me.
You didn't want to be the one to, let's say, take it to IPO or continue further with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I left in June of 2017. If I thought the company was going to go public in, say, December of that year, or in 12 months, or even in 18 months, I might have been tempted to stay, to kind of see it through to that point. I didn't see that, and in hindsight, I was correct. It went public 2021, so it would have been like a 4-year wait, which I think would, I probably would have ended up going a bit stale, and I would have regretted being there. I don't think I would have lasted that long for the right reasons. But yes, I think the dream in a way is starting something and then ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange or something like that. It just looked like it was going to take a bit longer for that, so I didn't want to go stale. I didn't want people to think, well, why is he still hanging around here? And I wanted to wake up motivated every day, and so I'm glad I left when I did. It was the right time.
So when you did leave, or now, do you have this pressure to maybe start a second company after your first one was so successful?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I shouldn't say it's a blessing and a curse. It is obviously a blessing, but it does up the stakes a bit. So it kind of, in some ways, other people will compare it. Even if other people don't, I will compare it. So there is a high bar there. So yeah, I'd be lying if I said that it didn't enter into the equation. I think I might start something again at some point, but it would have to be something that I expected could be meaningful and could help a lot of people. And I'm not going to rush into doing that. I enjoy the work I'm doing now, where I'm advising early stage founders. Maybe there's sometimes 2 or 3 of them. They're very, very, very early, and they're going through the same kinds of things that we went through. And I enjoy that, but ultimately it's somebody else's responsibility to follow through on the stuff that we talk about. So I'm still working out if I want to jump back into that myself.
Do you get the same thrill from advising others on their startups as you did actually starting one?
I don't think it's exactly the same thrill. When you're doing it yourself, when you're doing the work and you're getting most of the benefits, that is a bigger thrill. But I do enjoy it. I enjoy the variety of speaking to smart people, doing interesting stuff, and really trying to help them to succeed, and then seeing what does succeed and what doesn't. And the problem, if you like, of starting your own thing or being involved in one company is your whole life ends up just being consumed by that one thing. And that's great if it works, and that's great if you enjoy it, but the risk is that it doesn't quite work, and then you spend 4, 5, 6 years on something that you're not really enjoying, doesn't really go anywhere. The benefit of what I'm doing now is I can touch lots of different things and really go to the bits that are interesting and help in the bits where I can help, and to a large extent I don't have to do the more boring stuff that I don't have to do. You don't get quite the thrill, but you get a lot of the thrills, and you don't have to deal with a lot of the bad stuff as well.
If you do create, or when you do create your next company, do you think it'll be focused on trying to help young entrepreneurs, like you said, or do you think it'll be like your other ventures with finance?
Most of the companies that I involve myself with tend to have some financial aspect to them, fintech in some way. I think that's because that's my network, really, and they're the ones that approach me, and they're the ones that I get introduced to. But I would say that one of the things I'm learning is that a lot of the skills that I have, and I think many people have, are very transferable. And I think sometimes, we almost do it to ourselves, where we define ourselves by the industry that we're in, and therefore limit ourselves to thinking within that industry. And the reality is, a lot of the stuff that you learn along your career can be applied in many other places, many other industries. So I am deliberately trying to
get involved, or I am getting involved in companies who are doing other things that aren't closely aligned with what I've done before. And sometimes they're some of the more interesting ones.
I'm going to take us back a few ideas. I want to know, like you said, in SoFi you were feeling a little bit stale, like as if you couldn't pivot to the things you wanted to fast enough. How do you think in a future company that you're going to do, or as a CEO of another, that you would promote innovation and in a way that it's always kind of changing?
Yeah.
Even as a big company.
No, I get you. I mean, to clarify, I wasn't stale when I left. I wanted to leave before I went stale. And that's always hard to do because you kind of don't know exactly when that's going to happen. But I think I timed it right. When I left, I was still highly motivated, but I didn't want to wait too long. It's like I don't know, this may not be a good analogy, but a sports person within a team, like you want to go out at the top, and sometimes people hang on a bit too long, and then you only know that in hindsight. So I was happy about where I went out. But to the question about how do you kind of keep fostering an innovation culture, I think it's very difficult because most companies kind of start trying to do one thing at the beginning. They get good at that one thing, and the temptation might be just carry on doing that one thing because you can always do it better. You can always get more market share. You can always find new customers. You can always make more money. You're never going to be there. There isn't a finish line. But the risk of that, I think, is that at some point you need to look into a second product. And I would say we had this at SoFi where student loan refinancing was our main product. But very quickly, like 2 or 3 years into our existence, we introduced general personal loans and mortgages, which are huge categories of product in their own right. And in a way, like, we shouldn't have done that. In a way, we were only a small piece of the student loan market, and we could have grown it to be 100x, 200x, 1000x the size that it was. So in a way, we had no right to be thinking about other things like, why are we doing this? We should just concentrate on what we're doing. But in hindsight, I think it was a very brave decision, and I credit Mike, our CEO, really for pushing, because if you get kind of too comfortable, I think that's when you can get a bit complacent and you don't grow as quickly as you want. And you need those new challenges and the tough work that comes with launching a new product to really push yourself. And suddenly the company, SoFi, had 3-4 products, and the competition that we were going against in the early days tended to only have one. And sometimes that doesn't work out, because then if something happens to that one product, and in the student loan industry is a prime example where basically during COVID, all student loans shut down, no one had to make any repayments. So if you were a business that was purely relying on student loan refinancing, it went away overnight. So if SoFi had just gone that way, it'd probably be dead today. So the fact that it had other products that made money and could sustain it and grow it was a great thing. So yeah, you got to always be looking for the next thing. Don't get too comfortable, but it's a hard skill to know when to expand. It's also bad just to try and do 50 things at once and not do any of them very well.
Yeah, because I think you can also see a lot of companies that maybe stretch themselves a little bit too thin.
Yeah, it is a hard balance. I think at the beginning you want to try and have one product that you do well, you get known for, you're differentiated from the market. That then gives you the right to do other things.
So you're not coming out of the ballpark with like 10 different products that you think that you're doing like medium well on all of them.
That can work, but I think oftentimes when you're trying to communicate to a customer or a potential customer who's never heard of you, and you put a new brand in front of them, they only have so much bandwidth to take in, well, what does this company do? And if you try and do 10 things and try and sell 10 things, you try and sell 10 things on an app, there's only so much space on here, and you just confuse people, or you can just confuse people. So doing one thing or 2 things very well and being able to communicate that clearly will enable people to understand what you do and get interested. Maybe there's companies out there that can do 10 things at once, but there probably are, but it's a pretty tough skill to do.
So with your I won't say infatuation, but like love of with startups. How I also hear a lot about like they're very time consuming.
Yeah.
So how do you balance your work-life balance?
Sure. Well, I think that maybe is why I worked in a startup environment for a number of years. Then I took some time off to do some like more advisory work where you're in control of your day a bit more, and you can switch off your computer a bit more easily at night, because ultimately someone else is doing the stuff that you spoke about, and it's not up to you. And then I've gone back to the startup world, and then right now I've come back to the slightly more in control of my day. But that's a thing. Look, some people thrive off that, being busy all the time. I'm not afraid of hard work. I enjoyed it. But it is a commitment, and if you're starting something, you should assume that you're going to be doing this for years, and it will be almost definitely much more difficult than you expect it to be. It just is, and it will take longer to get stuff done. Employees will resign, and then you'll have to spend 6 months trying to find the next person. Stuff that just gets in the way of kind of doing the job. And you've got to really love what you do and really be 100% behind the mission of the company to get you through those difficult moments and those moments where you just have to work really hard.
So you think like you either do it or you don't? Because it seems like you either take a break and you spend time with family, and then you go 100% in and put everything into your company.
Again, it's different for different types of businesses, but in general, it's hard. I haven't seen too many successes where people have kind of done it on the side. You can maybe earn a few dollars doing something on the side while keeping a regular 9-to-5 type job. But ultimately, you probably have to leave that job and then do it full time. And in a way, that forcing function is what's needed, because then it's like, I have no income coming from somewhere else. I have to make this work. And you push yourself to make it work. When it's just on the side and it's kind of like a nice to have, then it probably won't happen in a big way beyond just, pocket money type stuff. Now, there are exceptions, but generally I would say that's the truth.
How do you, I guess now, like if you do want to start your next company, how are you going to, I guess, like tell your loved ones, I'm going to be spending a lot more time in this specific endeavor than before, and I won't have as much time to be with you guys?
Yeah, you have to be honest. It would any of that kind of decision I would discuss with my wife and make sure that it was right for us as a couple and as a family with our kids, because again, if you're going to do something like that, you should expect that it's going to take years and it is going to have an impact. So the worst thing is kind of jump into that, raise money, start hiring people, and then a year in realize that it's causing difficulties at home because of different expectations. That's a tough situation. So yeah, you've got to be honest with yourself, honest with your family, and only really do this if it's the right thing for you.
I think a major thing I've taken away from this conversation is that you have to face the hard decisions early before they really mess with you later, and when they're a lot harder to deal with.
Yeah.
So, do you think that's true in both, I guess, in all aspects of life, I guess, including creating a company?
Yeah, look, I think oftentimes your instincts at the beginning are good, and sometimes people know something's going wrong or going bad but don't admit it to themselves and try and dig themselves out of it. A little bit like when you make bad hires. Sometimes it's not that the person is bad, it's that they may not be right for that role at that time. And usually when you see that, you should act quickly, have a conversation with them. It's not working out. Let's go our separate ways or do something, as opposed to just kind of plugging away. And I think, to come back to your question, that's often the decisions you make. Sometimes you're never going to have all the information, and you're never going to be able to make the perfect decision. So sometimes you have to go with gut instinct, and it doesn't mean you make stupid decisions that aren't thought through, but if you try and
rationalize every single decision, write a spreadsheet of good and bad and which one's bigger. You'll talk yourself out of doing anything just because it's complicated. So sometimes you have to go with your gut, you have to go with instinct, feeling, and that can be uncomfortable. But if it's really uncomfortable, then this probably isn't the life for you, and you should go and stay doing a job that you enjoy, that doesn't involve this aspect. Every job is tough, but it's a different type of pressure.
I think it's time. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, and I'm sure that a lot of young entrepreneurs will benefit greatly from your knowledge and experience.
Thanks, Sebastian. Thank you.